Mac Macartney. Welcome, Mac. Thank you so much for joining us. And tonight we have the wonderful Clover Hogan with us from America. And so we're very pleased to have you here tonight. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, so I think everyone's in and we're recording, and over to you, Mac.
Well, hello everyone. It's really good to have you all with us again. So we are incredibly spread out. Even the Embercombe team are spread out, and I'm sat in the office newly arranged to COVID guidelines and much more pleasant, thanks to Nusha for creating it. And I'm really happy that we've managed to persuade Clover to come and join us, because I met Clover, I think, first time a while ago when I think you Clover were interviewing me. I seem to remember.
Yes. Yeah.
So we managed to turn the tables there. But what's really important for me about some of what Clover's going to share today is because as a young person, she's made such a huge and emphatic step in both herself and her action and the call she's making to others. And it is inspiring, and it's really exciting, and it's also joyful and happy and full of all kinds of good things, whilst also no doubt tears and some grief as well. And I just want to give you this quote. So this is a quote from Clover. I hope it's accurate. I believe that the future of life on Earth depends on how effectively we help young people realize their potential. So welcome, Clover. And I wondered if you would begin by giving us some sense of the journey that you have made that brought you, I think you say on the website something like been alive 20 or 21 years and been active in trying to make a difference in the world for 9. So I'm wondering, what happened in the first 10 or 11 or whatever years that brought you to a place of committing yourself to do whatever you could to bring about a rather happier world?
Thanks for the question, Mac, and thank you to the Embercombe team for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here virtually. So I grew up in Australia's tropical North Queensland, fishing frogs out of the toilet bowl and dodging snakes that hung from the ceiling. It was a normal day to kind of pick up every pillow on the couch and find a baby python curled up sleeping peacefully, and I would often avoid doing homework so that I could go and rescue beach sea turtles. So I grew up with the immense privilege and gift of being immersed in the wild and the wonderful. And so for me, nature was never an other. It was always a really integral part of my lived experience and why I got up out of bed in the mornings. My dad's a botanist, my mum's a personal development coach, so a lot of people think that I'm kind of the lab experiment of those two things brought together. But that was definitely the kind of background for why I had this deep connection to nature. But when I was 11, I started watching documentaries. So I watched The Cove, I watched Food Inc., An Inconvenient Truth, all of these incredible pieces of documentary making, which uncovered the extent of exploitation and subjugation on this planet. And it completely rocked the fabric of my existence and rocked the foundations upon which I stood. Because the thing that I cared about more deeply than anything else in the world, I realized was suddenly under enormous threat. And so I was filled with this kind of despair and overwhelm and also outrage, and perhaps no stronger feeling than a kind of confusion as to why we face these enormous existential challenges, ecological breakdown, climate breakdown, and yet it wasn't the topic of every dinner table conversation. We'd look to politicians and they were just playing these short-term games, and look to business leaders and it was still this kind of incremental approach. And so looking at the world around me, I realized that the moral just thing to do, and really the only thing that I could do, was to try and be a voice for the voiceless. And I saw that in that kind of darkness, there was light, and there were people shining light on the problems, journalists, filmmakers putting their lives on the line. And so I decided that I wanted to do the same. And so found my medium as a communicator, as a campaigner, and really figuring out how to shake stuffy dudes in suits into waking up to the kind of emergency, and responding with the urgency that the situation demanded. So that was kind of when the catalyst and that first aha moment came to me.
Thank you very much. Now, you a bunch of stuff in between that, if you like, and Force of Nature. You Leaders Quest for a while, an organization I know and am an associate with, and then with John Elkington with Volans.
Yeah.
I think I remember a rather pathetic phone call from me saying, "Would you like to come and work with me?" You've got greater things to fish to fry, but which was, I think, probably a sound decision on your part.
It was a very generous offer, and it took much contemplation, and I'm sure at some point in the journey we'll find a way to do something together, Mac.
So was Force of Nature, which is the organization now which you're really putting, I think, channeling most of your effort and work through, did that form in your mind a long time ago, or did that emerge, for instance, during the time at Volans or?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So it's funny because, not long after having this kind of catalyst moment, I coerced my parents into moving to Indonesia so that I could go to the green school, which is, wallless bamboo classrooms in the middle of the jungle. It's kind of like the Steiner system on steroids. So everything is learning by doing. And, instead of studying math from a textbook, we would go down to the local river, design a bridge, build that bridge with the local community, and then turn it into a self-sustaining social enterprise. So I very quickly landed in an accelerated kind of journey to change making. And it's a very special environment because instead of being asked, to pursue careers we have no love for, young people are asked which challenges they wish to solve in the world. And so I realized quite early on that the big challenge that I wanted to take on was this kind of feeling of powerlessness in the face of these big challenges. And I touched on that feeling slightly when I was 11 and started watching these films. And, it was this cognitive dissonance between, oh my God, we're in this kind of emergency situation, but we're not acting. And I'm just one in 7.6 billion people. So it was that emotion and that sensation. But it was especially heightened when I was 16 and I was a student lobbyist at COP21 in Paris, at a big climate agreement. And it was the first time my activism was away from the grassroots. So I was really disconnected from my impact. And I was suddenly immersed kind of in the belly of the beast. So working with politicians, with business leaders, and I became aware of the incredible pervasive greenwashing. I went to a sustainable innovation forum that was sponsored by Coca-Cola and BMW. I went into the negotiation room for a minute and could see that the entire time they were debating over the grammar structure of a single sentence in this like historic agreement for climate action. And so I felt so debilitated by all of those factors that it woke me up to the realization that, the threat even greater than the climate crisis is this very universal sense that we're too small to take it on as individuals. And so that's definitely when I identified that as the kind of problem I wanted to take on when I was 16. And that was when I first started to envisage what an organization would look like, where people, and especially young people who experience this real depth of kind of eco-anxiety and climate anxiety, a space where they would be supported to really step up. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. But I certainly reached a kind of inflection point having worked with Volans, which is an incredible kind of think tank meets consultancy that unpacks and unpicks really big concepts around how to rethink value in society and what, a world post-capitalism looks like. But in that experience, I was working more and more closely with business leaders, and I was working with the CEOs of huge multinationals that touch billions of lives every day. And I became aware that even in those places and those spaces, people with perceived power felt entirely powerless. So I would have a CEO tell me, oh, but I'm too small to make a difference, or I'm not the expert, or it's not up to me. And I was like, but wait, these are the same stories I'm hearing, volunteering in classrooms with students. So, this sense of being too small is pervading, every kind of corner of society. And so I realized that we needed to do something quite radical to take on this pervasive threat of eco-anxiety, of ecophobia, and Force of Nature really became the vehicle for that.
Fantastic. Well, your the premise, if you like, upon which Force of Nature is based reminds me also of something that I've said many times, and I've said the greatest danger that we face at these times is not climate change, but the passivity of millions of good people who stand on the sidelines, watch, observe, and sympathize, but ultimately never get anywhere close to bringing the full power of their gifts and their passion.
Yeah.
But I like what because passivity, yes, one way of expressing it, but why? And perhaps that powerlessness, that feeling of powerlessness. So tell us about Force of Nature and what you're actually doing.
Yeah, so you touch on a really important point there, which is, I think, for a long time as an activist, I believed that we didn't take action because of greed, of selfishness, of apathy, like just not caring enough about the issues. And I think that's also a manifest of a narrative in society that tells us we're here because of survival of the fittest and because we're inherently bad. And that's false on a scientific level, it's false on an evolutionary level. We've succeeded because we're so good at socializing, at being connected. We're the experts at building community, but there is this really dominant narrative that we're bad, and that's why we haven't taken action on climate change. And in fact, there is so much that happens in our kind of psyches, by way of the stories we tell ourselves about the world and about our role in it, that keep us from fulfilling our potential or taking action on the issues we really care about. So Force of Nature kind of exists to take on that eco-anxiety and take on the feelings that kind of shut us down and that prevent us from stepping up. And what we do is we run programs with students, which were initially in person in the UK and now have gone completely virtual, which is really exciting. But programs with the young people now all around the world, from Morocco to Indonesia to Iran to South Africa, who have all identified this feeling within themselves and want to shift from a state of anxiety about the state of the world to a real sense of agency and what can I do as an individual within a wider collective. So we run those programs, and it's kind of marrying the world of mental health and planetary health and a lot of behavioral psychology. And we're developing a pipeline now to not just mobilize mindsets, but to support those young people in mobilizing their own initiatives as well. So we're connecting young people together around the problems they want to take on, whether that's prison reform or microplastics or food waste, any of these really huge challenges, and not only connecting them to one another, but also connecting them to experts in the climate space, in the business world, who can really help facilitate those initiatives and those solutions and ensure that they're being done on the system level rather than, exclusively at the grassroots. So that's kind of one piece of work. Another piece of work is very much in around campaigning and around thought leadership, to destigmatize this kind of climate anxiety. And still sometimes people look at me a little funny when I use the word eco-anxiety, but the research is showing us that more and more young people are feeling this really, really crushing helplessness, and it's affecting their lives in a big way. So I first became aware of this when I started volunteering in schools in the UK, and would hear super dystopian stories from young people. So I would hear things like, it's too late, the planet's going to burn, I'm not going to university because what's the point of pursuing a career if there's not going to be a livable planet? I had a 14-year-old girl tell me, I've decided already that I don't want to have children because it would be irresponsible to bring them into this world. So we're hearing these very and I don't want to say dramatic because I think they're the natural response, but we're hearing these really extreme kind of stories coming out of young people. And so a big part of what we do is actually raising awareness within the general public that this is a growing phenomenon. It was recently reported that over 70% of young people in the UK are experiencing this form of eco-anxiety. That number is just going to continue to increase, especially in the context of COVID, especially in the context of having really negligent kind of leaders in power. So that's the second kind of piece of work. And then the final piece, which is kind of new territory for us, but really, really exciting, is this intergenerational exchange. So increasingly we're working with stakeholders from, teachers and parents in schools, all the way through big businesses like Procter & Gamble, which touches 5 billion lives every day, or PepsiCo, to ensure that young voices and young diverse perspectives are actually embedded in the leadership of these organizations, so that young people aren't just kind of given a token position or a token speaking engagement, but are actually influencing how change is created within the organization and what that looks like for, value creation across the supply chain, for example. So those are the three kind of areas, and very much the niche that we live at is around the kind of mindset and the psychology of mindset. So it's an exciting space to be, for sure. And I think the big learning for me over the past 12, 24 months has been that for a long time I thought a lot of my fears and anxieties about the state of the world were things that had to kind of be beaten into submission. And I've since realized in working with young people and connecting with them through these feelings that, in fact, the kind of sensitivity we feel is an incredible superpower. And it's really learning how to harness those feelings and channel them into expanding your sense of agency and the contribution that you have to give to the world. So yeah, that's us.
Wow. By the way, what is your category, if you like, for young people? Where does it begin and end for Force of Nature?
Yeah, so we, for our online programs, we're currently running them for young people from 16 through 24. But the work that we were doing in classrooms started as early as 11. And we're more and more, as we also collaborate with child psychologists to make sure that everything that we're doing is very sensitive and in no way increasing the eco-anxiety of young people. We want to work with young people as early as, 5 or 6 years old. And that's what's been really kind of interesting. I was so shocked to hear that in Parliament they were trying to push a bill and it's not going to go through, thank God, but to prevent young people from talking about climate change in schools in the UK. Yeah, I was absolutely baffled to hear this. I found out about it yesterday. And so much of this comes from a real fear from adults, from parents about, talking to the young people about climate change. And they worry that it's going to traumatize them and it's going to create, unnecessary stress. But, my argument to that would be that young people are already aware. I was walking through the Natural History Museum with my little cousin who's 6 years old in London. And she turned to me and she's like, so what's the deal with climate change? And am I going to have a future? And, there's no way, and it would be incredibly irresponsible to shelter young people more than they already have been around their future. We're told that we have a 10-year window to rethink so much of how we live, breathe, and exist to take on this challenge. And to shelter young people from that is an incredible betrayal. And it's part of the reason why there has been this kind of explosion and frustration and intergenerational friction with the youth strikes for climate, because similar to how I felt when I was 11 and I was looking around and thinking, why aren't we talking about this? A lot of young people feel like they too have been kept in the dark, and that has prevented them from being able to have a say about the future that we're ultimately going to inherit. We're told that by the time I'm 50 years old, by the time I'm 50, we're going to have 1 billion climate refugees, right? We're going to have radically raised sea levels. We're going to have, potentially widespread food system collapse. If that's the future I'm potentially inheriting, I want to play every part that I can to change that. And most young people do. I would say all young people do also. But how to navigate some of those difficult conversations, which they ultimately are, is to really connect young people not only to the fact of the situation, but to what they can do as well. So it's not enough to kind of drop the bombshell of, right, this is the situation. And as I so often hear, here's the baton. I often get people telling me like, oh, job well done. It's great that you're fighting the good fight. You guys you've got it in your hands. And I'm like, I'm a 21-year-old, and most of the young people on the front lines are, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. This has to be an intergenerational collaboration. And so much of that anxiety comes from feeling that there is a lack of solidarity and that adults aren't willing to step up to the challenge and support us. So yeah, we need much better cross-pollination of ideas. And I truly believe, and this is my experience, that, the magic kind of happens when we bring together the energy of youth with the knowledge of experience. And that's the future that I really want us to work toward.
Wow. Thank you so much. It is really exciting. I must say, it has brought me close to one kind of emotion or another when people my sort of age, or maybe even that 10 or 15 years younger, say something on the lines of, well, it's up to the young people now, as if they had previously dedicated their lives. You know what I mean? Yeah. So time to hand over the, when the truth is that to the vast majority, if you like, that has been peripheral to their adult lives, really. So, but there is also, and I think this is something which older people maybe, I don't think sufficiently have grasped, that this incredible opportunity at this time to step forward in collaboration, in relationship with the young, and stand together. So, and it's also, I think I spoke on one of the Embercombe online talks, but I pondered at the time when I was your sort of age, and the Isle of Wight was first festival happened, and all kinds of incredible things were happening, supported by a music. The music of the time was singing about Earth being alive and all these wonderful things. The thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people then, who are now my generation now, did they lose hope? You know what I mean? Did they gradually just find that the whatever it is that their lives have been has just sort of squeezed that out? But I'm sure that it could only take a certain amount to suddenly begin to reactivate and bring back, and then we got a really exciting picture.
Yeah, and I think that's an important challenge to young people as well. If ever we do kind of default to this generational finger pointing or blame game, I've had a lot of really good conversations with my dad about this, who is a very vocal activist back in the 60s and 70s, and was on the streets protesting the Vietnam War, and he said to me, what happens when young people's idealism and visions, what happens when they get, shoved into the furnace of the military industrial complex? What happens when, they're told that they need to make money, that they want to live a certain lifestyle, whatever. And I think there are so many pressures on each and every one of us, regardless of age or background, to fit into that kind of system. And I think, and that's what I find really liberating, actually, is that you are able to unearth that inner activist in even the most kind of calcified of leaders who have spent their lives kind of having to be very obedient to a position of hierarchy, or having to maintain the status quo. It is possible to reignite that, and I think it often happens around the dinner table, and it happens when executives speak to their kids or their nieces and nephews, and they turn to them and they say, oh, but what are you doing about climate change? And those are really important moments. They're really, really critical moments, and that's when you can kind of achieve that breakthrough. But that's it. There are plenty of young people now who have taken to the streets banner blazing, and they're kind of asking, what next and what comes next. And I think the thing that really uplifts me about the spirit of being young in the context of the world we live in right now with the climate emergency is that we're coming into all of these kind of systems with very fresh eyes. So, Yuval Noah Harari is an author who I quite like. And he talks about the one thing that really distinguishes us as humans is our ability to kind of tell stories and tell narratives. And it's our ability to subscribe to fictions. And yet there is so much in society that's fictitious that we forget. The story of capitalism, of limitless growth with finite resources, the story of commodification of people and planet. And what's refreshing about young people is that we come into these systems, we see the absolute absurdity of them, and we see the invitation and the opportunity before us to rethink them and to do things in a radically different way. And it's interesting working with different age groups, because one exercise I love doing is kind of beginning to imagine what a different future could look like. And, when I do this with young people, especially 11, 12, 13-year-olds, the images that they come up with are so colorful. Once you give them license and validation to imagine, they just come up with an incredible, beautiful world that you can imagine us being able to deliver through a Green New Deal and through jobs creation of solutions that serve us and that serve the environment. I did the same exercise with a group of German executives a few months ago. And the first question I received was, but what if it's impossible?
Oh, dear.
And yeah, exactly. And I was like, oh, okay, well, let's hone in on a specific problem that you want to take on. And they're like, oh, but it will never be solved. And, we learn to subscribe to these stories, and yet we lose sight of the fact that that's exactly what they are. They are fictions. And, the world has only ever been changed by people who have the courage to imagine it differently and to say, it's always been impossible until it's done, right? So, we need to all adopt that imaginative spirit. And I think young people are such a source of inspiration for exactly that. And that's not to disregard the incredible experience that comes from, being on the planet many more decades than any of us have, right? And being able to share in the failures and the mistakes and the learnings. So I think a lot of this is just being able to better empathize with the people we're trying to collaborate with and communicate with. And for us, it's, as young activists, it's being able to better put ourselves in the shoes of people who have a lot of power and also feel the real weight of that and the burden of that, and vice versa, adults and leaders being able to position themselves in the shoes of young people who feel really terrified about the future and who are desperately seeking allies.
Yes. Wow. I wanted to ask you in a moment around, the challenges that you're meeting at the moment, what's on your mind at the moment as you develop Force for Nature. But it's also, it sounds like it's already acquired a considerable size in terms of the number of lives you're affecting. You left the Green School. I don't remember seeing university.
No, I skipped over university.
So So who is we? This, when you refer to we?
Yeah, so we're a small but mighty team. We have 5 people. Force of Nature for the first year was very much a one-woman show, and that's because I had no idea how to build a team or what that looked like. And what was really incredible was that at the very start of this year, we put out an article with The Guardian. And it came off the back of a 15-minute kind of phone interview, and I forgot about it for several months, and then it kind of hit the main page, and it was this piece on eco-anxiety, and it was unpacking it, and it was incredible because it led to this kind of outpouring from around the world, people messaging, emailing, texting, saying, wow, I didn't know there was a word to describe how I've been feeling. And now that I have a name for it, I can begin to understand it and figure out how I move beyond it and how I move to something different. And in that, all of the people who've come to work at Force of Nature were people who read that article and reached out. We're all under the age of 25, just young people from different corners of the world saying, wow, I'm experiencing this, can you help, kind of thing. And each of my colleagues also facilitates our classrooms, and they're absolutely brilliant because they understand the depth of feeling, and they're very fluent in those different feelings and have a keen desire, having been there themselves, to support other young people to shift to a different kind of mindset and belief system. So yeah, Force of Nature is small, but we're growing, and we're trying to, it's quite exciting because I feel like, having had the privilege of working in different organizations and different models and structures, I've been quite clear from the start about how I want this to evolve. And for me, it's something that's very much decentralized and non-hierarchical, and we want to kind of morph and evolve to be what young people need, in essence. And so we say that with every classroom, we're here as a teacher, but also a friend, as a resource. We recognize that activism doesn't take any one particular face or background, or it doesn't fit into a cookie cutter mold. And I think that's kind of what really excites us about taking on this huge challenge, is that we recognize that while the climate crisis is the biggest threat any generation has ever faced, it's also the biggest opportunity, and it's also the biggest invitation to innovate and rethink these kind of systems that we were talking about. And lots of young people get really excited by that notion of, because we've so royally screwed the planet, there are any number of ways to help it. And so whether you're passionate about fashion or food or transport or the air we breathe, whatever that is, there's, the world is very much the 7.8 billion piece puzzle in which everyone has a place. And it's not about, I think a lot of young people who kind of subscribe to different climate movements still feel connected to their own smallness, because they're but a cog in another kind of machine. And really, we want to meet them, to support them, to realize where they show up uniquely and how they uniquely show up to solve a problem they most deeply care about, with the gifts that they have. And I think that's quite, on a personal level, that's a reaction to the standardized education system. Because while Green School is about, meeting young people according to where they're naturally smartest, I feel that the standardized system is about turning young people into a set of averages and kind of forcing them into a very particular mold. And I know a lot of friends who have left that system feeling really stupid because, they never had an opportunity to explore their passions or their talents, or they were told that they couldn't make a career out of X, Y, Z. And it's completely arbitrary and false, but, it's a symptom of that kind of industrialization. So
you're looking at one of them.
Really?
Yeah.
What was your experience of education, Mac, and how did you feel leaving that system?
I walked out of that school and I went to Woburn Abbey and saw Jimi Hendrix play. And I remember looking around and thinking, thank God for that. Like, at least there's something here to get excited about.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize the depth inside me, of the sense that I had nothing of value to give. I didn't know that, and was quite a long and hard journey,
Mm.
coming to a place where I sort of said, I don't have to just do stupid and crazy things and get into trouble as a way of trying to create some meaning in this life. I know what I love and what really cracks me open.
Mm.
So now I make the decision to give this life towards that.
Mm.
And then, of course, the whole story unfolded of the people, indigenous people who helped me move on from that place. But I do think of the countless, I was fortunate in many ways. I could easily have never emerged from that very dysfunctional, almost self-harming kind of place.
Mm.
And thousands, of course, don't.
Yeah.
So I've often thought, how would it be if a school's primary objective was that these young people should leave school feeling good about who they are and their value and what it is that they could offer.
Yeah, what a radically different society we would live in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just mindful of time, so I wanted.
Of course.
Yeah. So, key challenges that you think that Force for Nature is facing at this time, or anything you see coming on the horizon?
Yeah. So, I mean, on a society level, definitely feeling this tension, and it's something that came up in a classroom we facilitated a few weeks ago with lots of kind of established youth climate activists in the UK. And it's this real sense of anticipation but also nervousness around this next kind of 12-month window. I think we're all very connected to the sense that COVID-19 has caused us to press pause on our kind of hyper-consumptive, globalized throwaway culture, and provided many of us the opportunity to really stop and think about what it is we want to invite into the future and what it is we want to leave behind. As we look to the future on a very tangible level, governments are planning to inject trillions of dollars into the global economy, and it creates an incredible invitation because governments have the opportunity to inject that money, that funding, into a Green New Deal, into an economy that creates green jobs and that supports people and that has universal healthcare and education at its core. So we have this incredible opportunity, and yet there's also a lot of apprehension that it won't go that way and that we will further distance ourselves from the possibility of being able to reverse cataclysmic environmental change. So that's one of the big challenges that we're really facing right now. And I think we're thinking about it very consciously because tomorrow I'm speaking at a big event alongside the CEO of YouTube, of Procter & Gamble, the CMO of BlackRock, all of these major institutions. And we feel the pressure to ensure that they wake up to the fact that, there is no hope in another 10 years of incremental change. So that's one of the big challenges on my mind right now, is how we're able to mobilize mindsets in those spaces, so that people are really, awaking to the urgency of this, and also the invitation, the opportunity that we've been talking about. So there's that on one level. And then I suppose the other big challenge for us as an organization is really being very considerate about who we're serving and our stakeholders. And I had quite an aha moment last year when I was working in a school in Bristol, and I was delivering a climate presentation, and there was a group of girls in the back corner who were kind of chatting and giggling away and not paying attention whatsoever. And so I went over to them and I was like, oh, how is this landing for you guys? Like, is this interesting? And in that super kind of blunt way, they turned to me and they told me their stories of having immigrated to the UK. And they told me very honestly, how do you expect us to care about climate change when every day we experience racial discrimination, sexism, gender discrimination, religious discrimination? And it was this huge wake-up call from me as someone who does exist in such a bubble of privilege, who has had every opportunity extended to them, that there lived experience was very far removed from my own. And I realized that this is a big challenge within the climate and environmental space. And I think it's especially heightened in the context of Black Lives Matter, the realization that, you know, social justice and climate justice are two sides of the same coin. And in fact, we won't deliver, you know, climate solutions until social justice is at the, you know, central DNA of everything that we do. And it's made me think really long and hard about how we're ensuring that we're supporting young people in communities already experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis, and how we're also not just existing within our own kind of siloed echo chamber of young people who are already kind of engaged in issues because they have the privilege to. Like, that's the reality of the situation. I get to focus on climate action because I have a roof over my head, because I have access to clean water, because I have food. I don't live in a food barren environment, you know, so I have all of these privileges afforded me. And so we need to ensure that we're serving all of the young people who don't have that.
Well, what is so great is that you walked up to them and asked that question and gave them the opportunity to give you their truth, as it were, and then to sit with that and consider. Absolutely. I'd love to ask you also, I mean, we've had over the years many people come to Embercombe who are really, you know, out there doing so much and have been for a long time, and all the time questions of exhaustion and depletion and losing hope. I remember also one of the big environmental NGOs I went to go and speak to once, and I deliberately arrived sort of a couple of hours early and went around just chatting with people. And what came to me then was, here we are, we're one of the biggest of our kind, you know. We identify a situation that needs meeting. We mount a campaign, we do our research, we launch the campaign, and we hurl everything at it, you know. We win a few small skirmishes, ultimately we lose. We fall back, we reform, we regather, we establish our resources, we know. We mount a campaign, we win a few small successes, ultimately we lose, we fall back.
Yeah.
And people crying, you know, in that group, because that is, you know. So my question to you, because in this 40 minutes that we've been chatting, you are, you know, it's an exuberant Clover, you know, it's a joyfulness coming from you, as well as seriousness and everything. But how do you sustain yourself?
Oh, such a good question. So a couple of things. I started to talk a little earlier about realizing that my eco-anxiety was not something that should be beat into submission. And I think this speaks for so many, you know, quote unquote negative feelings, what we're told are negative feelings in society. You know, we live in a society that's based around this narrative of kind of positive psychology, which is always telling us to be our best selves, our smartest selves, our brightest selves. And I found myself falling into that trap where I had to constantly uphold this persona of being someone who was super optimistic and positive and happy and all of those kind of tick boxes, but I was disallowing the plethora of other emotions. And it reached this real breaking point for me when in November of last year, my home country of Australia was on fire. And it caused such grief in me, but grief that I would not allow, that I started doing this kind of mental gymnastics to be able to cope with the situation. And it reached a point where I just started spontaneously breaking down in public. And which was especially amusing in London, very like polite society, because I'd be on the train and just start sobbing and everyone would look very confused as to what to do. And it was a wake-up call, because I realized that I wasn't allowing myself to grieve. And so that's definitely one of the ways that I've learned to cope a lot better, is to not disallow any of those parts of myself, but to realize that they are what give me my power and my strength. You know, vulnerability is such a strength. And definitely creating the space for that without judgment. You know, I'm trying to be much better about it on social media, because I think social media creates such a rose-tinted window into our lives that it's very easy to look at other people and think, oh, they have it all put together, and you know, we only post about our wins and our successes, we don't talk about our low points. So I'm trying to be much more open and honest about my struggles with anxiety, with panic attacks, with mental health problems, because I see how it creates uh, a safety net for other young people, and an opportunity for us in solidarity to be really open about how we're feeling. The other thing that I would say, and I think this is in direct response to what you're saying about working with this big organization that was very, you know, it sounds like they had quite a war mentality where they're very much fighting the problem.
Yes.
I think so many of us fall into this trap, and you see it often in the wake of protest, where young people experience this powerlessness when particular demands are not met by those in positions of power. And it's because we need to reevaluate our quote unquote metric of success. We need to rethink what it means to win versus lose. And I had this conversation with a friend who has worked on a lot of political campaigns in the US. And I said, you know, when a candidate doesn't get in and you've spent the past 12 months of your life trying to elect them, how do you keep your sanity? And he said it was really hard initially. And it was really, really difficult because so much of his identity was wrapped up in either winning or losing. And yet he realized that the most important part of that campaign was all of the change that they were able to create in the lead up to that moment. Right. And in fact, by the time they reached that point, it didn't really matter whether that person got in or lost in terms of their own reaction to it, because they knew how good the work was that they had done. And I would say the same thing about, you know, climate. It's been a really hard pill to swallow, to appreciate that we might fail, you know, to prevent 2 degrees Celsius warming. You know, we might fail to mobilize enough people to act. And I have to become okay with that outcome, because if I don't, it's a sure way to burn out. And it actually, it extracts me from the present moment and the joy that I get from just acting every day, not because I'm working toward that arbitrary outcome, but because I just know that it's the right thing to do. So it's about, and I'm sure it's, you know, you probably gave that kind of advice to the team that you worked with. It's, you know, just as much as we are reacting to these problems, we have to find joy in solving them. And we have to continue to create that balance, because if we don't, then what's the point? You know? So that's definitely how I'm finding ways to cope.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. So we're going to invite people to ask any questions that they would like to you. Nusha, how do we arrange that?
Yeah, so if anyone has a question, there's a little raise hand icon, or you can, although a lot of people don't have their video on, you can just do a real life hand wave, or you can pop it in the chat as well if you're a little bit shy. So yes, so this is your opportunity to ask Clover any questions you might have.
Okay, so maybe while that's happening, I'll ask Clover something else while any questions come in. Clover, what's, I don't know whether this is the right word, but you know, you have an audience in front of you right now, aside from me and Nusha. And is there, either maybe some of them are young people, maybe they are the parents of young people, maybe they're the teachers of young people or the employers of young people. You know, is there anything that you would say, whether it be advice or invitation or anything you'd like to offer to those people at this point?
Yeah, for sure. I think for the quote unquote adults in the room, I think part of the reason we run away from talking about climate change, and part of the reason we maybe suppress our feelings of anxiety around climate change and the state of the world is because we fear not having the answers. And I think something that we really need to shift toward as we care for and look out for young people is to be much more open and honest about not having all of the answers, but to have the willingness to show up beside them and to find the answers alongside young people. And it's a real shift in leadership that needs to happen in my belief, across politics, across business, but also in the school system as well. A lot of teachers don't have these conversations because they don't feel well enough equipped to talk about eco-anxiety, but it's nothing clinical, you know, it's just talking about our grief and our sadness and our frustrations. And it's a very, very powerful thing when we come together in intergenerational exchange. And to any young person listening, I would just encourage you to continue connecting to those feelings, to find the power and the full palette of feelings, from the things that make you angry and frustrated to the things that make you sad, and also the things that fill you with hope, and to never feel invalid in those feelings, and to know that each and every one of them had something to tell you and has something to teach you, and in fact that you will find incredible power in acting on those emotions and continuing to connect to them.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I've noticed
we had a question from Lucy. Sorry to interrupt, Mac. So we had a question from Lucy. Do you have any plans? Do you have plans to do any training for teachers? So I think you touched on that just now, but yeah, that would be.
Yes, yeah. So we did actually run a teacher training. We ran two a few weeks ago. I think we had over 150 teachers dial in from around the UK to have a conversation around eco-anxiety. That was in collaboration with my partner in crime, Caroline Hickman, who is an eco-psychotherapist of the Climate Psychology Alliance. She's done a lot of really brilliant work. Her most recent research project was working with young people in the Maldives who are already experiencing sea level rise, some of whom are losing their homes. And so she has a deep understanding of the different psychological responses to climate change, and how to help young people navigate some of those trickier emotions. So yes, we are definitely working with teachers and constantly looking for more opportunities to be able to engage teachers in a more meaningful way and really equip them with the tools that they need.
Fantastic. Have you had any questions come in there, Nusha, or seen any hands up? I'm scanning my screen.
No. So we have here's one that's just popped up. What about getting it onto the UK curriculum?
Yes, this is an awesome question. So in reaction to the fellow who tried to suppress climate conversations in schools across the UK, there is an awesome campaign called Teach the Future, which I really encourage anyone tuning in to check out. It was started by a student. It's now grown into a huge kind of student network of young people who are working with ministers and working with people in power to integrate climate into every part of the curriculum, and not as some kind of satellite subject, but really to be talked about in the context of mathematics and English and geography and all of that good stuff. And of course, to have much more open conversations around our emotional responses to climate as well. So that's 100% on the agenda. Oh, I think we might have another question. What's the craziest animal you ever found in your house? That's such a good question. And I think I can see from the person giggling on the screen who it came from. The craziest animal I ever found would probably be, well, we used to care for little wallabies. wallabies that would fall out of pouches. Yeah, so that was probably the craziest by British standards. But otherwise, lots of scaly things. There was a really funny day actually, because snakes in Australia, the ones in the trees are really safe. The ones on the ground less so, but the ones in the trees are fine, but they often fall on you. And so there was a day when my dad, on 3 separate occasions, opening doors, had snakes fall down his shirt. Yeah, which sounds quite terrifying, but he actually thought it was hilarious.
As a quick drop in while we're on the topic, I had a ride with a taxi driver. It took me over Haldon Hill to Embercombe, and he told me, and it's what he said, that one night in the winter he was driving and his headlights caught this animal. He said it was a kangaroo. And
no way.
And he says nobody will believe him. He said it was a kangaroo, and all he knew was that many people with exotic pets, when they got too difficult to handle, would let them go on Haldon Hill. And to this day, he maintains he was not deluded. It actually happened. Anyway.
That's amazing and hilarious, and I wouldn't know what to do with myself if that happened.
Have you seen, Nusha? There's a question on Facebook too, it says. I've got down here.
Let me have a look. I've been having some problem with my call, so I've dropped out, but let me have a quick look. Okay. But I think we need to wrap up shortly. So any final questions on the team?
I've got one.
Which company? Sorry, Mac, do you want to say?
No, you go ahead. Which company?
Yeah. Which companies do you see doing most work with young people on these issues and or empower young leaders to take action? Good question.
Yeah, awesome question. I'm very excited to see this kind of explosion in for-purpose companies who are moving beyond the kind of pervasive greenwashing and bandwagoning, but actually have purpose at the center of everything they do. And it's quite exciting because I think for a long time, the worlds of for-profit companies and non-profit kind of charities were very, very separated. And now there's this really interesting middle ground by way of social enterprises. So the first company that I ever worked at when I was 17 years old is called Impossible Foods. They're the company that makes the Impossible Burger, which is basically meat made from plants. And they have completely changed the food industry in this country in just a few short years. They're changing the food industry in China, and they're taking on one of these huge, messy problems through an incredible feat of technology and innovation. And the leader, Pat O'Brown, looked at me and saw that I had not a shred of experience under my belt, that I had no university degree, and that I just had raw passion for solving this problem. And he kind of took me under his wing so that I could join the company, which was an awesome experience. And to this day, they've been an incredible company to support young people and to realize that, in fact, and I think more companies are waking up to this, more of an asset than exam results or university degrees is just the drive to make a difference. And there are lots of other awesome companies in this space cropping up. Oatly is another one, which has just had a $2 billion valuation, taking on the milk industry and dairy industry. Patagonia is a brilliant organization. There are more and more companies cropping up that are just doing awesome things for the planet. And I think any company that has purpose at its core naturally is going to have lots of young people flock to it as well.
Fabulous. Really appreciate, Clover. Is a very short window? Is there anything that you need, anything that anyone doing, including Embercombe, that you would be grateful for, that we might be able to help you, assist and support you?
Thank you so much for the offer. I would say that we recently put out the Force of Nature podcast, and it would be awesome for everyone to go and check it out. It's a 9-part series interviewing ordinary people doing extraordinary things for the planet, from Marcus J. Ball, who prosecuted Boris Johnson for lying to the public during the Brexit referendum, through to Fahana Yaman, who's an incredible climate climate lawyer who decided to glue herself outside of the Shell building, and is an amazing force for change, through to Pam Warhurst, who started a global food movement out of her backyard. So I would encourage everyone to go check out the Force of Nature podcast. Let us know what you think. And we're hoping that it's a seeding ground for more change makers to really step up to their change making potential and take on the seemingly impossible problems.
Well, from me, and I'll pass to Nusha in a moment, but from me, thank you so much for your time and giving us such a wonderful blast of Clover Hogan. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. It's
Oh.
always incredible to be in your presence, and just very, very much admiring of what you've created, and delighted to help in any way that we can as well.
Thanks. Nusha.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, that's just been such a wonderful intergenerational exchange, which is what's needed to progress forward. And yeah, you can really feel your raw passion, Clover. Thank you so much for being with us. And I'll plug the podcasts that you just mentioned onto our stream. And yes, just one more plug from us. We've recently just created a fund for the Black protests, that Black Lives Matter protests that have just been in the news. So if you feel called to donate to that, that would be wonderful. And yeah, so just keep an eye out for future offerings. And thank you again for joining, and have a lovely evening. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.